Southern Sense Talk Radio with your host, the radio chick, Annie Ubelis. Join Annie on Tuesdays and Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time with an open chat room full of her regulars. And yes, you can even call in. Call 917-889-3675. That's 917-889-3675 to be a part of the action on the phone line. Not able to listen live? Not a problem. You can always catch Annie, the radio chick, and Southern Sense Talk Radio podcast in archives at southern-sense.com. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Southern Sense the right way.
Oh, TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. And it's live here on Southern Sense, here on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie, along with my debonair, my intellectual, and my oh-so prolific co-host, Curtis C.S. Bennett. Good afternoon, Curtis. And check out his website, which is theoriginalradicals.com, as well as checking out our website, which is the name of the show, put a dash in the middle, southern-sets.com. How's that for an intro, Curtis?
I am humbled by it every time I hear it.
Oh, man, we got ourselves a fantastic show today. We've got my good friend, Mike Cutler, who will be joining us at quarter after the hour. And for those who don't know Mike, he is a dear and special friend of mine. I've known him since 1989 when he was investigating the murder of my friend, police officer Bob Machadi. And we've remained friends over all those years. We've lost touch for a little while. We reconnected, and no one could love me as much as he does. I hope my husband isn't listening. Anyway, Mike will be joining us at quarter after the hour. We'll be talking about all things border security, immigration, resettlement, Hillary Clinton emails. We're just going to go all over the place with him. That said, a little on the serious note, those that listen to the show know that we start off each and every show with a dedication to a fallen hero. And once again, the fallen hero is another law enforcement officer that just a couple of weeks ago passed. So, Curtis, as we move forward, we're going to give our dedication out to Deputy Sheriff John Thomas Isenhour of Forsyth Sheriff's Office in North Carolina. His end of watch was Wednesday, September 28th of this year. And as I bring up the dedication music, this is from journalnow.com. The Forsyth County Sheriff's Office is grieving the death of one of its own after a deputy was hit by a car on September 18th and died from his injuries 10 days later. Deputy John Thomas Isenhour, 38, was struck while directing traffic on Clemens Road during the annual Bike MS Tour to Tanglewood, a fundraiser that features routes ranging from 17 to 100 miles and attracts hundreds of cyclists. Sheriff Bill Schatzman said deputies in his office are grieving with and for the Isenhour family. It was a terrible, terrible accident that killed Deputy Isenhour, he said. Law enforcement is a dangerous business and seems to be getting more dangerous every day. We know this and act accordingly to protect ourselves and protect our community. Isenhour was struck by a 2006 Lexus driven by Jesse Cook, 92, of Advance, said Lieutenant Jeff Gordon of the North Carolina Highway Patrol, which is investigating the incident. Isenhour tumbled over the Lexus, breaking his neck, ribs, pelvis, both legs, nose, and other facial bones. He was in intensive care at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center until his death. According to a statement on a GoFundMe account set up to help Deputy Isenhour's family, he was hit by a 92-year-old woman so hard that he was thrown up in the air, smashed her front windshield, thrown over the car, and smashed the rear windshield. The woman later said she didn't know she hit someone. Isenhour had worked for the sheriff's office since October of 2015. Prior to his service with the sheriff's office, Eisenhower had served in the Marine Corps, for 17 years. Louisville Mayor Mike Horn offered his condolences. "Anytime we lose someone in our community, we are deeply saddened," Horn said. "This is especially true with someone like Deputy Isenhour, who protected our community and took on the extraordinary role of law enforcement. I know we share in the grief and sadness that the Sheriff's Department has, as well as Deputy Isenhour's family." Isenhour's death is the 8th line of duty experienced by the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office since its establishment in 1849. And this is from Deputy Isenhour's obituary. John Thomas Isenhour died September 28, 2016, after complications from an accident while on duty as a deputy sheriff with Forsyth County in North Carolina. John was born on December 29, 1977, raised in faith and Salisbury. John was baptized and confirmed through the Lutheran faith at St. John's Lutheran Church in Salisbury. He was educated at Rowan County Schools. In August 1993, John attended high school at Riverside Military Academy in Gainesville, Georgia. He excelled in academics and sports and graduated with honors in May of 1997 as company commander of Delta Company. He was awarded the top senior wrestling award, the Superior Cadet Award in military, and a medal with the Daughters of the American Revolution. John enlisted in the United States Marine Corps after completing training in Parris Island, South Carolina, with Platoon 3091, I Company, November of 1997. As a private first class, John was an embassy guard in India and stationed at Okinawa Island in Japan before doing communications for the Marines during 4 tours of Kuwait and Iraq. He was promoted to gunnery sergeant before retiring in August of 2014 after 17 years of faithful and dedicated service to our country. John was stationed both at Camp Pendleton, California and Camp Lejeune. Immediately after the Marines, John wanted to be in law enforcement near his family's hometown in Rowan County. For the past year, he was employed by the Forsyth County Sheriff's Department as a deputy sheriff. John was a gentle giant who never stopped learning during his short lifetime. During summers off from school, he was a lifeguard at Happy's Lake and worked for Jerry's Texaco. A hard worker, he was always up to new challenges he faced as a Marine and a deputy sheriff. John's outside interests include lacrosse, fishing, swimming, camping, cruising, watching military documentaries and movies. John was a master at playing video games. He loved spending time with his children and dogs. In addition to John, is survived his wife, Nanette Dawn Morgan Champion Isenhour. Today's show is dedicated to Deputy Isenhour. It is dedicated to all the brave men and women out there who have served as first responders, who voluntarily give their lives and time to protect and serve. It is also dedicated to all the brave men and women in the military, to those that have served since the birth of this nation, to those who will serve in times to come. And we dedicate them this song, Last Call, by Dave Bray. God bless them all.
Please hear me out. forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. Tell her I'm sorry, that I can't be the man that she's gonna be. Tell her I'll be waiting where the winter will fall. This is my last call. Tell my children they're loving, oh yeah, daddy always loved them so. Tell them to hold the mother's side and to never let her go. Tell them I'll always be watching, looking over them through it all. This is my last call. Tell them to fight for me. Do what's right for me. Choose the light for me. Don't ever forget me. Tell them I'll always be watching, and I'll be there when they fall. This is my last call. Those who serve beside me and who held that thin blue line, stand tall, stand strong, hold your head up high. I'm sorry I let you down today, but please know I gave my all. This is my last call.
Dave Bray. Last call, and you can check out Dave Bray at davebrayusa.com. We're back here live with Southern Sense here on Blog Talk Radio, High Plains Media, SHR Media, Kinetic Hi-Fi, the Fix FM out of Charleston, South Carolina. I'm your hostess with the mostest, the radio chick, Annie, along with my co-host, Curtis C.S. Bennett. And Curtis, we've got ourselves a great guest. All I have to do is ask him one question and let him rock and roll the rest of the way. Are you ready for him? Are you ready?
I am ready. I'm ready.
I want to welcome everyone also that's listening up in our chat room and also listening in on their smart devices. I will give you a word of caution. If you're having a problem, BTR is having a little bit of a pissing contest with Blog Talk Radio. Blog Talk Radio is having a pissing contest with Skype. You can Skype in if you directly dial the number. Otherwise, well, you can always listen to us on Spreaker. So let's bring aboard my friend, former INS agent, Mike Cutler. Good afternoon, Mike.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, Curtis. I hope everyone's having a happy Friday. Looking forward to a great weekend coming up.
TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. And I know, Mike, you've got your...
Indeed.
You've got your show on in about 7 o'clock tonight here on Blog Talk Radio. So if you do use Skype, this is the problem. You can't use the Skype button. What you have to do is open the Skype program, manually dial in and then put in your PIN in order to get your show going. So just giving you a word of caution. This is how I was able to get into the show today. So I know people are having problems.
Crazy.
It is crazy because I was
crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is. And I was on Tim Tapscott's show the other day, and he had Skyped into his own show, and he got kicked out right smack in the middle of the interview. So I actually carried his show for about 5-10 minutes until he could get back in.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. So, they are having some issues. It happens every time they decide to upgrade. Just leave it alone, guys. It's working fine. Don't do anything else.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
There is so much for you and I to talk about, and this is the craziest election season. I can't say that enough. I mean, you've been around since the dinosaurs, but I've only been around voting since Reagan.
Thank you very much.
But have you ever seen?
Thank you so much.
But have you ever seen an election cycle as nuts as this?
No. In fact, I got my badge back in 1971. So it was Richard Nixon who was the president. Then we had Jimmy Carter. Then we had Reagan. I've never seen anything like this. But I think what's really happening is our country is really in a perilous situation. We no longer have politicians who even care about what the average American thinks or wants. This is all about pandering to the people who write the checks. This is all about a government that's been bought and paid for. I do a lot of public speaking events. I work with a group, a fascinating group. I'm very proud to have been working with them now for well over a decade, Allen L. Freed Associates. They do seminars primarily for the military and the intelligence services. They have some really great speakers, people like Ken Duberstein, who was Ronald Reagan's last chief of staff, Ralph Nader, who needs no introduction, Yuri Maltsov, who had been the former senior economic advisor to Gorbachev and Yeltsin when the Soviet Union was unraveling. And I was just in Washington. I did 2 events for them within the past month. And, pardon me, and I was in front of this group of Air Force brass, primarily colonels and generals, and I said, when you're back at work, when you're back in your offices, have fun with the people around you. When you go to lunch, don't tell them you're going to lunch. Tell everybody you're going out to raise some funds. You're going campaign fund. You're going fundraising. And everybody thought it was very funny. But it really is what's going on. As a police officer for you, as a federal agent for me, we were not allowed to take a cup of coffee from somebody. Mm-hmm. You have politicians taking with both hands. You have Citizens United saying that corporations can basically write unlimited checks to campaigns. And they give money not to one side or the other because they believe in one candidate over the other. They give huge amounts of money to both candidates at the same time because all they want to win is themselves. They want to know that they have influence, that they have access, and that they can make a phone call and get what they want. And we're seeing it. And if you look at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I put the Chamber of Commerce up there with some of the most virulent and anti-American organizations in the United States. To me, it's not much worse, or not much less of a threat than the Communist Party itself. They want an unlimited supply of cheap foreign labor, an unlimited supply of foreign tourists, and an unlimited supply of foreign students. It's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that has coerced the government into expanding the visa waiver program, even as we're seeing more and more radicalization of Europeans, people who can enter America without visas. Instead of saying this visa program has got to be changed, we've got to go back to visas, we've got to cancel the visa waiver program. On 9/11, we had 26 countries that participated in the visa waiver program. We're now up to 38. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce partnered with executives of the hotel, hospitality, and travel industries, created something that they call the Discover America Partnership. If you go to the State Department, they actually tout the Discover America Partnership. I've never seen the government touting a private entity before. This is referred to as a quasi-government private conglomerate. And the goal of this conglomerate is to flood America with workers, students, and visitors. And they will stop at nothing. And so they're the ones pushing for the expansion of the visa waiver program, even though the 9/11 Commission, to which, by the way, I provided testimony, warned that we needed to tighten the visa process. And the politicians, playing Americans for the fools that we've become, say, well, we know that there were Europeans that might come here under the visa waiver program, so we're going to put changes into effect. And what was the change? When an alien from a visa waiver country goes to countries in the Middle East, such as Syria, such as Iraq, such as Yemen, such as, I believe, Lebanon and Ethiopia, they're going to have to get a visa. And it sounds great, but here's the question. How in the world will our people know where these people have been? I mean, you're almost expecting them to walk into the State Department with a transcript from bomb-making school. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, we can
How's
laugh.
that for an image?
We can laugh, but it really, truly is not funny because we have record number unemployment. We have people training these H-1B1 visas, H-1B2s, whatever the heck they are, training them to take over their own job. Disney's done it.
Yep.
GE's done it. You can name almost every single major corporation that has these
HP has done it. So here's the thing.
We're putting our own people out of work.
Yes, and Hillary Clinton stood there during this last debate, and she makes these statements. Let me see. So here she says, so everyone will, I will do everything so that everyone will have good jobs with rising incomes, and I will stand up for families and against corporations and the powerful. Really? The Clinton Foundation has partnered, believe it or not, folks, with the Gates Foundation to make certain that girls and women around the world are being treated fairly. Whatever happened to girls and women in America, and while we're at it, boys and men in America? So this globalist push by Bill Gates is something that Hillary has signed on for full bore. It is Bill Gates who has pumped over $1 billion into pushing for unlimited H-1B visas. Alan Greenspan quoted Bill Gates. Think about this one. On April 30th, 2009, Alan Greenspan testifies for Chuck Schumer over at the Immigration Subcommittee in the Senate and starts talking about the privileged elite, which was how he describes American high-tech workers, talking about how, and he quotes Gates, and actually makes it clear that we need to open the floodgates. First, he talks about how illegal aliens are a flexible labor force and how we've come to depend on them. I mean, unbelievable. And he even acknowledges that this doesn't sit well with the average American. However, they're a flexible labor force that only minimally suppresses wages. If you're at the bottom rung where you're making minimum wage and you lose 25 cents an hour, that's enough to keep you awake at night. And he doesn't care. And so I got to just read this quote to you because this goes really to the, I'm just trying to find the exact part of where he talks about Gates and then what he says after that. All right, so here he talks about the H-1B visas, and he says this. The second policy issue, second only to the employment of illegal aliens, the second policy issue that must be addressed by Congress is the even more compelling need to facilitate the inflow of skilled foreign workers. Our primary and secondary school systems are increasingly failing to produce the skilled workers needed to utilize fully our ever more sophisticated and complex stock of intellectual and physical capital. That's not true. We are producing engineers and scientists and programmers. There's nothing wrong with the system, but it's the lie that they keep telling. They just flat out lie. And he goes on and says, this capital stock has been the critical input for our rising productivity and standards of living and can be expected to continue to be essential for our future prosperity. You got to wonder who ours is. Does he have a mouse in his pocket? See, American wages are in decline. So when he talks about our future prosperity, he's talking about himself and the top 1%ers. And then he says, the consequence of our educational shortfall is that a highly disproportionate number of our exceptionally skilled workers are foreign-born, 2/5 of the science PhDs in our workforce, for example, are foreign-born. Silicon Valley has a remarkably large number of foreign-born workers. Yes, they do. And this was in 2009. It's only gotten worse. Not because we have a shortage, but because these foreign workers are displacing American workers. And then he goes on and says this: the quantity of temporary H-1B visas issued each year is far too small to meet the need, especially in the near future, as the economy copes with the forthcoming retirement wave of skilled baby boomers. Really? Forthcoming wave? It hasn't happened yet, but let's bring them in now and avoid the rush later. These people haven't retired yet. They can't wait for them to retire, so they push them out the door. But there is no shortage of the baby boomers yet. So that's another lie. And then he quotes Bill Gates. As Bill Gates, the chairman of Microsoft, succinctly testified before Congress in March 2007, quote, America will find it infinitely more difficult to maintain its technological leadership if it shuts out the very people who are most able to help us compete. He added that we are driving away, quote, the world's best and brightest, particularly when we need them the most. Well, how many politicians talk about American exceptionalism? America isn't mountains and streams, rivers and lakes. America is its people. So if you believe in American exceptionalism, and I certainly do, then the world's best and brightest are called Americans. And if you look at the successes that America has scored in sending the Juno space probe to Jupiter, in flying by Pluto with New Horizons last year, and they show mission control, you didn't see people from India or other countries. These were American scientists, American engineers, American programmers staffing mission control at Jet Propulsion Laboratories. It's lie after lie, but then this is the part that gives people who have high blood pressure issues, so that nobody has an aneurysm. If you suffer high blood pressure, take your pill now, because here comes the real bad news of Alan Greenspan. How's that for setting it up? Let's tee it up properly.
You know,
Greenspan said this. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when you and I were growing up, the kids in high school and college were the ones that were out there mowing the lawns. They were the ones out there in the fields picking the tomatoes and everything else. Americans will and can do the manual labor. We can mop the floors, we can flip the burgers, and we also can be the ones that send the astronauts into Mars, as they're planning now, as Obama had called out to do. Let's send...
We've done it all. But look, there's something else, Annie.
Are we too stupid
They're
now?
cutting down on the number of people.
Take a stupid pill? Have they put stupid pills
in
our water?
The stupid pill is what happens on Election Day and in between Election days when Americans don't get involved in their own government. We are crappy employers. We are allowing our employees to be insubordinate rather. Okay? Those members of Congress work for us, except they don't realize it, and that's our fault. We're shitty bosses, pardon my language. It angers me. There is no shortage of American high-tech workers. There is a dwindling need for manual labor jobs. Increasingly, factories are becoming mechanized and robots are doing the jobs. If you watch how it's made on TV, and I watch it all the time, and you look at car factories, when you think of the Model T Ford in those grainy black and white movies, you see these burly guys in grease-splattered coveralls physically pushing the car along the production line, bolting on the various parts to it. Today, most of that is done in sterile factories that look more like they're building spacecraft than cars, where only a handful of actual manual workers do anything. The engines are being built by robots. The body panels are being stamped out by robots. The chassis is welded by robots. When my dad bought the only new car we ever bought, because he worked at the World's Fair as a construction worker, so he made lots of overtime, so that year we bought a 64 Chevy Bel Air. I remember they warned my father, try to find out when the car was made. You don't want to buy a car that's made on a Monday, because a lot of the workers will come in still hungover from the weekend, and the welds might not be done right, and the bolts holding the chassis together might not be bolted on properly. So try to get a car made in the middle of the week. That was the conventional wisdom. Today we don't worry about that because robots don't come to work with a hangover. The cars are largely made on an assembly line with robots. We're doing it increasingly in other ways. Now McDonald's is looking to mechanize what they do.
Yep.
And by the way, McDonald's just fired 70 American accountants. Apparently we don't have enough accountants in America either. But let me just, before we get away from this, I just want to read the balance of what Greenspan said about this business, about bringing in H-1B visas. And so he says this: our skills shortage, I trust, will ultimately be resolved through reform of our primary and secondary education systems, but at best that will take many years. An accelerated influx of highly skilled immigrants would bridge that gap and moreover carry with it two significant bonuses. First, skilled workers and their families form new households. They will of necessity move into vacant housing units. Doesn't that sound like a Norman Rockwell painting, that vacant housing unit? You know, the one with the broken windows, the house that was abandoned by the family whose mortgage was foreclosed, right? Vacant housing units, talking about American homes. It infuriates me. But he said they will of necessity move into vacant housing units, the current glut of which is suppressing prices of American homes. And, of course, house price declines are a major factor in mortgage foreclosures and the plunge in value of the vast quantity of U.S. mortgage-backed securities that has contributed substantially to the disabling of our banking system. That is a blatant, utter lie. The reason that we have those mortgage foreclosures were the subprime mortgages that he engineered. In fact, I have a statement that he made 5 years earlier before the Federal Reserve Bank when he was its chairman, bragging about technology making it possible to provide mortgages and loans to people who otherwise would not have qualified, but now by using technology and spreading the risk. That was the whole idea. We're going to spread the risk, right? Well, the risk, they could spread it as thin as they wanted. It faltered, it failed, and we wound up in a banking crisis because of Greenspan and his lies. But so here he's blaming the victim instead of blaming the cause. But this is really what's amazing, what he says next. The second bonus would address the increasing concentration of income in this country. So here's Greenspan saying, someone's making too much money. Guess who that someone is, folks? Now, here we go. If you have high blood pressure, I hope you've taken your pills. Greatly expanding our quotas for the highly skilled with lower wage premiums. Folks, this isn't wage premium, it's salaries. With lower wage premiums of skilled over the lesser skilled. Skill shortages in America exist because we are shielding our skilled labor force from world competition. Quotas have been substituted for the wage pricing mechanism, and in the process, we have created, catch this term, folks, a privileged elite whose incomes are being supported at non-competitively high levels by immigration quotas on skilled professionals. Eliminating such restrictions would reduce at least some of our income inequality. So what's Greenspan saying? If we could force Americans to compete with people from the third world who have third world expectations about working conditions and wages, and we cut the salaries of those Americans, then we would greatly reduce the difference in pay that some guy with a PhD makes versus some guy who dropped out of high school. In other words, let's get rid of the middle class so that there is no longer a problem of wage inequality. Everybody will be eating out of the same dumpster in America.
Exactly.
How outrageous is that?
Yeah. What they do is they're going to take the dumbing down of America what they're doing in our school system with Common Core, and using it as an excuse to say, well, Americans don't have the skilled labor anymore, so let's bring them in so that this guy that used to earn, say, $25 an hour because he was worth $25 an hour, no, we'll bring in a third world person who knows less than him, have that person do the same job at, say, $7.25 an hour. So, let's close the wage gap. Has no one read Ayn Rand's Fountainhead, that where we have a value, we have a worth, and that if I go out there in the work field, that I should be able to say, I feel I am worth $30 an hour. Let me prove to you that I am, and you will.
Well, they're not even doing it. Yeah, but Annie, you're missing the point. This isn't about $25 now. These are programmers. These are people that are making $150,000 a year, and deservedly so. And what they want them to do is to make $35,000 and $40,000 a year. Right now, what they're doing with the H-1B visa, instead of blanketly saying you can't pay for a foreign worker when Americans are available, if you pay them at least, I think the number now is $63,000 a year, there's no longer a test as to whether or not Americans are being displaced. This has been engineered by the politicians from both political parties. So when Ted Cruz was running for president, he wanted to have a 5-fold increase in the number of H-1B visas. Understand what we're talking about. We are taking Americans with advanced degrees and we're going to pay them the same as people who drop out of high school. This is about the engineered destruction of the middle class. And when I met with members of Congress, chairmen of committees in Congress in Washington who are Republicans, because remember, all chairmanships go to Republicans because they're in control in both the House and Senate. Just about all the chairmen that I have spoken with and other members of Congress, with the exception of Jeff Sessions, Louis Gohmert, Lou Barletta, Sessions is my hero in the Senate. The others, when I say to them, why aren't you using this as a campaign issue? I'm advising the woman who's running against Chuck Schumer here in New York State, Wendy Long. And I'm going to be meeting with her this week, and, I'm helping her with her campaign. But, of course, Schumer's got all this money, and people blindly follow this guy. She gets it. And when I read the statement to her from Alan Greenspan, she freaked out, and she's on the road talking about that wherever she goes. She's up in Buffalo today. I was just on the phone with Wendy a little while ago. However, when you talk to most of the members of the Senate and you say to them, why aren't you going after the Greenspan speech? You know what their answer is? They change the topic. They change the topic. I was speaking to a Republican chairman. Again, that's redundant. And this was 2 years ago. The guy got so angry that his ears were glowing beet red. At one point, I thought the ears on the side of it were going to fly off the side of his head and float away like two little butterflies. He was enraged. I said, this is about the willful, engineered destruction of the middle class. I said, if you want to know why the economy is in the dumpster, it's because we have destroyed the consumer base that corporations depend on. I was not much of a fan of Henry Ford. There were lots of rumors about him being anti-Semitic and a friend of Hitler's and so forth, but he was a very shrewd businessman. And working with the auto union that was beginning then, the workers' unions, they came to the conclusion that it was in his best interest to pay his workers every last nickel they could afford to pay them, to motivate them, number one. That's why communism doesn't work and capitalism does, because people work harder when there's a reward for working harder. But also he knew that if he wanted to sell his cars, and enough of those cars to be profitable, then he wouldn't be able to succeed unless the people who built the cars could afford to buy the cars. And that's why he was so successful, because the same guys on the assembly line were also the guys that were showing up in the showroom on the weekend to purchase the cars that they worked on. Today, the average American can no longer buy the services or the goods that he or she wants. That's why most car ads now on TV don't tell you what the car costs to buy, but they tell you what the car costs to lease. Mm-hmm. We've destroyed the consumer base. If Donald Trump said we're going to get Mexico to pay for the fence, that's silly. We don't need Mexico to pay for the fence. If you could stop the massive flow of money being wired out of the United States by foreign workers, these remittances, we are losing hundreds of billions of dollars every year in the form of money being wired by foreign workers, both legal and illegal, back to their home country. Mexico's second largest source of revenue are the remittances being wired home from America. America is the cash cow for Mexico, and America is something else. America is the safety valve for Mexico. Mexico is controlled by a wealthy oligarchy. Carlos Slim, who is a Mexican citizen, educated at a Mexican university, made all of his money working in Mexico, at one point was the wealthiest man on the entire planet. He's still way up there in terms of what his net worth is. If Carlos Slim could be the wealthiest man in the world and be from Mexico, and if you look at the fact that the Mexican economy is number 16 or number 17 in the world out of 200 countries, it is way up there. Why then do we have abject poverty? When I went to Border Patrol Academy in Texas, one weekend we had a 4-day weekend, so we flew into Mexico City, and then I rented a Volkswagen, and I drove a Volkswagen in the mountains above Mexico City. It was really scary because there were places where there was no guardrails, and you would look down, and there were like 1,000-foot drops, and there were a couple of places where you saw wrecked cars down below. You know the people didn't survive. Very scary. But when you're young and dumb, you do all kinds of dopey things. I went to Los Paramados, the pyramids. I believe it was Charlton Heston's voice that beams out at night, at nightfall, and they have colored lights playing on the pyramids, explaining everything. And it was freezing up there because we were at about 10,000 feet, and as soon as the sun went down, the temperature dropped like 35 degrees, and the Mexicans would come out and rent you blankets, serapes, for like 10 cents or something, and that was a lot of money for them to stay warm. But as I drove on those roads leading up to Los Paramados, what dawned on me was the abject poverty we saw. People living literally in hovels, holes carved out of the side of mountains. And instead of a front door, they hung blankets over the opening to this hole in the mountain that they lived in. It was like the Stone Age. Mm-hmm. And when you see that level of poverty, and then you drive through Mexico City and see mansions and Ferraris and Rolls Royces, and then you contrast that with the people living in the holes carved out of mountains, you realize that Mexico is indeed an oligarchy. About 3 years ago, a professor, I believe it was in New Jersey, had said that America is no longer a republic but an oligarchy. He was at Princeton University. Then he referred to America as an oligarchy. What is happening, Annie, Curtis, is that for America, Mexico is the role model. It should be the other way around. But because of the wealthy gaining control over the politicians, and look at how they gained control over politicians. I was an agent for 30 years. I started as an inspector. I did that for 4 years. I was an adjudications officer. I did the marriage interviews. And then for 26 years, I was a special agent. So I have a very broad background on immigration, and I rotated through all the squads. I was the first immigration agent assigned to the Unified Intelligence Division of DEA, and then I was promoted to senior special agent and assigned to the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. So I had desks at the FBI, DEA, ATF. I worked with a bunch of foreign governments, the Israeli National Police, the Japanese Police, RCMP, New Scotland Yard. So I really took a scenic tour. But I've been involved with the political process as well. In the 81, and I think I worked with Al D'Amato, who was our senator at the time here in New York, and we got the aggravated felon law passed. So what it taught me was how the politicians work. Now, here's the deal. Yes.
Okay, go ahead, finish.
I just wanted to finish. These guys, for the most part, and Al D'Amato did the right thing, and there's some politicians like Sessions who really want to do the right thing, and they're doing everything possible. But most of these people aren't leaders, and they're cowards. They're afraid to death that they might have to take a real job if they lost an election. So look at the way the news is portrayed. Look at the pollsters who come up with this notion of Latino voters. I was just before the Indiana State Senate this past August. They gave me over an hour to address their immigration committee, and this is on the state level. And I started out, and you had to see the looks on their faces. I thought a couple of them were going to faint. I said, anybody who buys into this fraudulent notion of Latino voters is a bigot and a racist, and I'll tell you why. Every American, and I don't care what their skin color is, I don't care their ethnicity or their religion, whether your last name is Rodriguez, Goldstein, Smith, or Jackson, we all want the same thing. We want the military to keep our enemy as far from us as possible, whether it's terrorists or whether it's other countries. We want law enforcement to keep our streets safe. We want the schools to educate our kids, and we want to know that anybody willing to work hard and study hard can write the next success story, irrespective of race, religion, ethnicity, or gender. And to say that Latinos somehow don't want that or want something totally different from all other Americans, number one, it's a lie. But if you buy into that, then you're a bigot. And they've created this notion, and I can't tell you how many people I meet who are of Latino ethnicity, who are furious. They say, well, what do they think we are? A bunch of law violators? We want gangs to come into our schools? We want drugs to be sold on street corners? You know, if you want to know if the borders are secure, the best metric that can't be argued, forget about the lying numbers from this administration. Every time they spout numbers, they're lying. I've never seen them to tell the truth in all the time they're in office. But the price and availability of heroin and cocaine are irrefutable. We do not produce a gram of heroin or a gram of cocaine in the United States, and it is illegal. The only way that those substances get to the street corner in the United States is by being smuggled in. And they are smuggled by necessity by foreign nationals, and not just from Latin America, from Asia, from Russia, from the Middle East, from the Caribbean, from Africa. And people are people are people. Every race, every religion, every ethnicity has the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's that simple. And I've arrested criminals from, virtually every continent except Antarctica. And the way they conduct themselves is pretty much the same, because human nature is human nature. So when you look at the level of criminality that we've invited into our country, and yet what's remarkable, they're now starting to do a rerun of a new version of the This Is Your Brain on drugs, the frying egg in the frying pan. But the cigarette commercials have been so successful, so effective. I can barely watch them. I lost my parents to cancer when I was in college. My dad died of lung cancer, in part because he smoked Chesterfield, and in part because he worked in the Navy shipyards during the war, and I'm sure he was also exposed to asbestos in the construction trades. He died in '67. But those commercials have been very good. When I was a kid, I used to hose down the driveway in my house and sweep the sidewalk, and there were always cigarette butts. There aren't anymore. People don't smoke the way they used to. And I really believe that the commercials have been effective. Why then don't we have commercials warning young people in particular about the perils of meth, heroin, crack, or cocaine? And I'll tell you, I have a hunch. Because if you took the drug money out of the banking industry, look at Wells Fargo now. They may actually be charging some of their executives with identity theft. These people belong in a jail cell. You look at the stock market, you look at real estate, you look at high-end auto sales, high-end jewelry sales. Those industries are floating on drug money. And I really believe that that's the reason you don't see a concerted effort to cut down on the demand for narcotics by effective commercials. It worked with cigarettes. It's been effective with drunk driving. You still have people that are stupid enough to drink and drive or text and drive or smoke cigarettes, but the numbers declined drastically. We know that these public service announcement campaigns work. Why then do you not see people hooked on crack talking about what it did to their lives the way that you see people on respirators who have emphysema or lung cancer who smoke cigarettes? Because our government no longer gives a damn about the average American. For America to do well, Americans need to do well. That was the understanding the greatest generation had at the time of the Second World War. The Labor Department used to be in charge of running immigration. It was moved to the Justice Department when Nazi saboteurs came ashore and tried to blow up facilities in the United States, and everyone said, wait a minute, immigration is an issue of national security. They put immigration under the Department of Homeland Surrender, as I call DHS, after 9/11, because on paper, people recognize that if you can't keep terrorists out of the country, they're going to attack you. But yet, you have sanctuary cities that are guilty of aiding, abetting, encouraging, inducing, harboring, and shielding illegal aliens from detection by the federal government. Those are elements of felonies under the smuggling statutes that are part of the Immigration and Nationality Act. How does that happen? It happens when you have politicians who don't care about what they do to their country or to their fellow citizens, but do care about how they can get their next fix of cash and how they can get the promises of those votes that they need so that they don't have to take a real job. That's where I think we are today. I'm sorry for being a little bit long-winded, but go ahead, Curtis.
Michael, business people like Bill Gates and Rupert Murdoch and some of the others, they have a global business view.
Yep.
And I'm just curious how much you think that is impacting their allegiance to this country.
They don't have an allegiance to this country. By definition, if you are a globalist, you don't want to see borders. I testified before a hearing before the House Immigration Subcommittee, and one of the other witnesses was from the United States Chamber of Commerce. And at one point, the members of Congress had a call for a recess so they could vote on pending legislation. And this guy came up to me and said to me, you need to stop doing what you're doing because those borders are an impediment to my wealth. Do you know how much more money I could make if we had no borders? And I said, you know, our borders are our first and last line of defense against terrorists. And he just shook his head at me. And we got into this really big argument. And what was the deal? The deal was he sees the border as an impediment to wealth. Period. And this is a very short-sighted view because, as I said, we are destroying the consumer base. If you look back to when we were successful and when the economy was humming, what it really meant was that Americans were making enough money to live decent lives. They had 2 cars in the driveway. They started buying homes. Look at the 50s. The average CEO was making perhaps 50 times as much as the people that worked for him. That's fine. We're now in a situation where the CEOs are making more than 500 times as much. Now, I'm a capitalist, but if you understand that we're talking about CEOs who run publicly held companies, when they start shoveling money into their bank accounts the way they do, and they start flying around the world on airliners, not Learjets, all paid for by their companies, then their workers aren't getting the money they should be paid. The people investing by buying stocks and bonds in those companies are not getting the return on their investments. But what you're witnessing is the phenomenon where these CEOs sit on each other's board of directors, and it's the board of directors that determines the remuneration and the perks that they give to each other. So the CEO of ABC company goes to the CEO of the DEF company and says, I'll do this with you. I really want to get a nice new 737, and I know you want a new pay raise. So I'll vote for you to get $20 million a year more if you vote for me to get that airplane that I'm dying to have. They shake hands and they vote for each other. It's collusion. It's like trying to deal with Tony Soprano. The system, as Trump keeps saying, is rigged, but it's rigged in such a way where it's not only destroying our democracy, it's also doing damage to the notion of people who contribute money by buying stocks and companies. People are buying stocks, and these people are guilty of legally embezzling the money that should be going to both the workers and the stockholders. You know, if it's a privately held company, if I go out there tomorrow and I write a great novel and I make $1 billion and I want to squander it, that's my money. But if I'm running a company and people are investing in my company and I squander that money, it's called embezzlement. And by sitting on each other's board of directors, you have legalized embezzlement. Tell me I'm not making sense to you.
No, you're making excellent sense because I own stocks. So, yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so you see what's happening?
Yeah, because I would say 10 years ago, I would see great dividends on my stocks and see great returns. But for the last 5 years, I don't see that anymore. So it's very interesting the way you bring it to light. Because,
and are these companies profitable? Are these companies still profitable? Sure they are.
Yeah. I never even thought about it. I left the stocks alone, and I says, I'm just going to leave them alone. I'm not going to touch them. Whatever happens, happens, because that's money. I said I had this amount of money I could throw away if I win or lose. But maybe I should pay a little bit more attention. They rely on someone like me that would say, all right, fine. It's like you've got a small savings account you put aside. You're not going to touch it. You're going to ignore it. And you don't care what happens to it. This is what we're doing, and they rely on people like me with that sort of an attitude. And I'm ashamed of myself.
And they're relying on voters to do the same thing. And they're relying on voters to do the very same thing, Annie.
Oh, man. I got to tell you,
people hate the Congress, but they love their congressman.
Well, actually, I got to say, I do love my congressman because he's a good man, a good conservative. He's had his faults, and whenever I see him start to step out of line, I said, wait a minute, Mike. I'm sorry. Yeah, Mark, wait a minute. And I will call him or I will text him and he will pick up the phone and the two of us will have a chat. So I got to say, I do fortunately have a very good congressman, but the vast majority out there are not like that. And you named just a few of them that are good, like Jeff Sessions, like Louis Gohmert. Oh, God, I love Louis. I could just hug him. Honestly. I did actually the last time I saw him.
Well, when I was with Louis in Florida, because, I'll put some websites out, and I'll mention it again a little bit later on, but for you folks listening, if you're interested in what we're talking about, I have a couple of websites I'm dying for you to go see. My own personal website, of course, is my favorite. That's just the way it is. It's michaelcutler.net, C-U-T-L-E-R, one word, michaelcutler.net. I write for capsweb.org, Californians for Population Stabilization. I write for The Social Contract. And I do a lot of writing for Front Page Magazine, sponsored by the David Horowitz Freedom Center. And a couple of years ago, David Horowitz and his center invited me to, participate in a speaking event or a panel discussion in Florida, in West Palm Beach. It was really beautiful. And I was there with Senator Jeff Sessions and Louis Gohmert. And Sessions and I know each other. We've met a number of times in the past. I've testified before him when I've been before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he quoted me from the floor of the Senate in 2007 because I had written an op-ed for the Washington Times about comprehensive immigration reform, and I gave comprehensive immigration reform a new title. I called it the Terrorist Assistance and Facilitation Act. And he liked it so much that he quoted me with attribution on 3 separate days during the floor debate, and then he sent me a certificate commemorating it. And, in fact, I'm sitting here in my bedroom staring at the certificate. My wife hung it on the wall. And it's my reminder when I wake up in the morning that we can make a difference if we try. And, sometimes when I go to college campuses or I do a speaking event, people say to me, well, I'm one person. What can I do? And there's something for you to think about. History is written by individuals. Mm-hmm. History is written by individuals. If you go to a park and you see a statue with some guy on a statue and there's a plaque down below, the statue was erected to commemorate the difference that person made in a moment in history when that difference made all the difference. If you look at history, or if I was to say to you, if we mention the Second World War, without looking at a computer, without going to outside resources, no lifelines like in Millionaire, just on what you know, I'm going to give you 15 minutes, write down every name of everybody, good or bad, whether they were Nazis or liberators, Americans or Brits. Write down the name of everybody you can think of who played a pivotal role in the Second World War. I bet you most people can't come up with more than 24 names. Meanwhile, the Second World War displaced millions of people all over the world, resulted in the death of tens of millions of people. The world, humanity across the planet was in turmoil and chaos over the Second World War. Yet, people would be hard-pressed to come up with a list of more than 24 names off the top of their head of people who played pivotal roles during the war. The same thing with the American Revolution. The same thing with sending man into the moon, into space. I had the privilege of meeting Jim Lovell and Dave Scott and Jim McDivitt, the astronauts. I have a photograph taken of me with Gene Kranz at a time when I desperately needed a boost. I had just had cancer surgery for prostate cancer. My wife talked me into going to this event. I felt like a truck had run over me. And I have to tell you the story because when you talk about American heroes and role models, and I look at some of these athletes, when I was a kid, sportsmen were considered, if you're a good sportsman, today it's all about drugs and money and greed and violence against women. It's disgusting. I took my sons to a book signing by Gene Kranz. My dream as a kid was to be an aerospace engineer. I got letters from Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom. I did a little single-engine flying as a kid. My oldest son's an engineer. My youngest son is studying engineering. And I went to the book signing, and I'm online, and I had brought along a copy of the book, Failure is Not an Option, but I was also going to buy 2 more copies of the book and have Gene Kranz autograph it. And he's sitting at this desk, and people are waiting online to get the book signed. And I said to him, Mr. Kranz, I have a book that I bought previously, and I'd like to buy 2 books. Would you mind signing my old copy also? He said, no, my pleasure. I said, you lived out my life's fantasy. And he said, well, it's kind of you to say it, but do you mind if I ask you what you've done with your life? I said, yes. I said, I'm a federal agent. And he looked up. He said, where are you assigned? I said, I'm INS, but I'm assigned to the Drug Task Force. I've worked on terrorism investigations and so forth. And in the middle of this event where he was sitting there signing books, he stood up, shook hands with me, took one step back, and threw me the smartest salute you could have imagined. And he was a combat pilot who flew in MiG-Alley during the Korean War. He himself could have qualified as an astronaut. And he said to me, Mr. Cutler, he said, I don't think your life was without consequence also. I thank you for your service to America. And I'm getting choked up telling you the story. I had lost my parents and my first wife to cancer, and having just had cancer surgery, I wasn't sure what my future was going to be. And I'm there with 2 of my sons who were in awe. And I said to him, Mr. Kranz, there's one favor I have. He said, what's that? I said, I brought a camera with me. Would you mind taking a picture with me? He said, no, Mr. Cutler, I won't take a picture with you. I want you to take a picture with me.
Wow.
Tell me that doesn't choke you up.
It does. It does.
I had tears in my eyes. I walked out of there and I couldn't stop crying. He made my year. And that's what a leader is. That's what a hero is. That's what a good American is. And we have forgotten that. And all we hear from the politicians who should be in jail is the work Americans are too lazy to do because they're physically demanding, or jobs that require intelligence we don't possess. There's a guy by the name of Homer Hickam who wrote a book called The Rocket Boys. And it became the basis for a screenplay called October Sky, and every kid in America should be forced to read the book and see the movie. Homer Hickam, it's a true story, grew up in Coalwood, which was a coal mining town in West Virginia. His father was a coal miner. And he had no desire to go into the coal mines, and the only way out of Coalwood back then was either an athletic scholarship or you were going to be in the coal mines. And he didn't want to do coal mining. And his brother was a great football player, but he was a klutz, which I can relate to. And he won the science fair, got to meet Werner von Braun, who's a mixed bag because of what he did during the Second World War with slave labor at Peenemünde, but nevertheless, he's the man who got us to the moon. And by the way, again, talk about individuals. Do you know the name of the person to whom we owe all of our manned space efforts, really, when you come down to it?
I would probably say Werner von Braun.
Well, who inspired him?
Would it be Albert Einstein?
Jules Verne.
Jules Verne.
Jules Verne. Yep. It took one man with a vision, and that vision was so contagious that lots of other people caught that vision. Robert Oppenheimer, the guy who built the first liquid rocket engines, also was inspired by Jules Verne. And what's interesting, in Jules Verne's book, From the Earth to the Moon, I don't know if you know this, but he envisioned using a cannon, which of course wouldn't have worked, but they didn't know about rockets back then. We didn't have rockets per se, because the acceleration would have been so great, people would have died at the moment that the cannon went off. But he placed the cannon within 100 miles of Cape Canaveral. He did the math and said that it would take 3 days, and he envisioned sending 3 people to the moon in a capsule that weighed pretty close to what the command module of the Apollo capsule ultimately weighed.
Wow.
Yeah, Florida would be the best place.
Well, we got a comment in the chat.
Florida would be the best place.
Yeah, Curtis, we got a comment in the chat room. I just got to add this out there. My friend Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot, put in the chat room that Homer Hickman's brother Jim was the football coach at his high school. So here we go. It's a small world. Small world.
Well, and I had the privilege of speaking with Homer Hickam because he was on a show that I've been a regular on for many, many years. George Putnam passed away several years ago. Great radio guy. He was the oldest journalist in America, broadcast journalist in America. He used to host the television news in California. and Chuck Wilder was a sidekick. Chuck now has the program called Talkback on CRN, and I'm usually once a month, sometimes twice a month, I'm on the program. When George Putnam was there, and he was a good friend of Mike Wallace, and Mike Wallace and I had about a half dozen lengthy phone conversations after 9/11. He was very supportive of what I was trying to do. So one day, in fact, Putnam taught me a lot about broadcasting, and one week had me on every day for an entire week, and he started introducing me as the host of the show, and he was my guest, and everybody started laughing. So one day, Chuck, he sends out a notice tomorrow on my program, and he has the list of the guests. Well, it was Homer Hickam and myself. And so I called Chuck at home. I said, Chuck, would it be possible for me to have a conversation with Homer Hickam? He said, I'll call him up, I'll get permission, and then I'll give you his home phone number, which he did. We spent about 40 minutes on the phone. What a gentleman. And then he sent me a copy of a newer book that he autographed and sent it to me, and it's on my bookshelf, and I'm very happy and very proud to have it. But the reason I'm mentioning Hickam, Homer Hickam, who wrote this book and the screenplay, talked about how he won the science fair, and it catapulted him into a career where he became part of the space program for NASA. He trained the astronauts on the space shuttle. Homer Hickam also delivered the eulogy at the Sago mine disaster. And I watched the eulogy. It was carried live on television. I watched that Sunday church service, the memorial service for the miners, because he said, and I wanted to see what he would have to say because he's so eloquent. And he said something that brought tears to my eyes, and I'll never forget it. And my wife walked into the room, and I was mopping up tears. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, Homer Hickam just said something, and it so resonated, it reminded me of my father. What he said was, there's no water holier than the sweat off a man's brow. How's that for an image?
That is a great
Think of that reverence. Contrast that reverence for hard-working, honest American workers who actually do something instead of BS everybody with the politicians who talk about the work Americans won't do. I carried my father off his job his last day at work. He called me up with a raspy voice. He had lost a lot of weight. And he said, Mike, you got to come get me. I can't do it anymore. And I'm trying not to lose it. It was tough. And it was raining that day, and the weather fit everyone's mood. I went to the job. It was about 1 o'clock, and I had to literally help my father walk to the car. And the guys on the job had all stopped working. All the noise of construction stopped. It was dead quiet. And they were all looking at me, helping my father into the car, and they were crying, and I was crying. I walk by construction jobs to this day. I can almost imagine seeing my dad there. And the smells of the earth being turned as they dig the foundation, and the sounds of all the noises of the construction workers, that cacophony, to me it's an orchestra, it's not noise. It's an orchestra. And we hear these politicians talk about the work Americans won't do, and I got to tell you, I want to take some of these SOBs out back and beat the snot out of them. What do you think of that?
I'll be right there with you. This is the problem we have with our government.
How dare they? And we elect them again and again. What in the world is wrong with us, we the goddamn people?
Because
how
government
dare you allow people to talk about you that way, and you continue to allow them to sit in that cushy office and BS everybody and pocket all that money for doing nothing but damaging us and insulting us and undermining our country and undermining the future of our children and their future, and we treat them with reverence and respect?
Because,
are you serious? Have we lost our collective minds?
Mike, you know what it is that today's generation, they can sit at home and get the welfare check, get the Section 8 housing, get the food stamps, get the free iPhone, the free internet.
Nobody wants to do that. Listen. No, that nobody wants to do that. And when you have those situations, what you're looking at are people with no opportunities and no role models, and no one's doing a damn thing to change the equation. When you saw those riots, my mother came here as a 14-year-old girl ahead of the Holocaust. Her mother couldn't get out of Poland. She was killed by the Nazi bastards. I was named for my grandmother. And my mother lived in a rooming house by herself at age 14 and worked in an umbrella factory for $3 a week. So when people tell me about immigrants, we're talking about what we've done to our own citizens. You have kids who don't have opportunities. And my mother, for a while, lived in Baltimore. Her family settled in Baltimore. And when I saw the riots in Baltimore, it broke my heart. Those kids are being manipulated by this administration. Instead of providing opportunities, we've taken every opportunity away. You know, I raided factories, and when I came back the next day, there were lines of American workers waiting to get the jobs that Americans don't want. Yeah, believe that nonsense. My partner and I, when we worked midnights, and I worked with Randy for about 6 or 7 years, and, you know, you were a cop. When you work with your partner, it's almost like being married. You're best friends. You know, you're putting your life on the line with this person. Am I right or wrong, Annie?
Exactly right.
And Randy and I, we were a team. And we got angry because I used to pull into this gas station back at Kennedy Airport on Rockaway Turnpike. And every time I went there was some people there from Pakistan or some other country, Guyana, you name it, and we would arrest them. And I said, you know, let's do something fun. And we'll have to stay up late to do it, but I got to get even with the bum that keeps hiring illegal aliens. And this was before it was a crime for knowingly hiring illegal aliens. So we would go in there at 10 o'clock at night, because these guys were working the night shift. And I'd say to them, okay, where's your paperwork? Where's your passports? We don't have it. Okay, you're under arrest. Well, I have to call my boss. So they'd call up the boss. The boss would come out. One night he actually came out in the bathrobe. I swear to God, we got him out of bed. And we did this about a dozen times, and always on the night shift. And then, of course, we were stuck till 3 in the morning, and we didn't get paid overtime for that. We just used to have a built-in overtime, and if you worked 20 hours, it was the same pay as if you worked, 10 hours. But it was worth it to us. It was a matter of principle. And one day I pulled into the gas station, and I said to Randy, well, it's going to be another late night. He said, yep, another late night. And there were 2 American black kids working in the gas station. They were college students, and they were going to use the money from the gas station to pay their expenses so they could stay in school and get their degrees. I hope they became successful. They were tremendous kids. I was amazed. We stood there talking with them for about an hour. And as soon as we pulled in, they said, we heard about you from the guy that hired us. He said there were these 2 SOB immigration agents that kept arresting people in the middle of the night, and he was hoping that if he hired these 2 kids, that he wouldn't have to worry about us anymore. And they thanked me. They said, we have vending machines with coffee. Can we get you anything? I said, no. I said, the fact that you guys are here and you're making a paycheck and it's helping you to get through college is more pay than I could ever hope for.
Well, wow.
Now, it's a small story, 2 people, but understand something. It's always the small story. I went to a memorial service because of the Holocaust. My first wife's parents were in the Holocaust. Her mother was in a concentration camp. So they used to get tickets every year to go to the memorial service at Temple Emmanuel, which is the equivalent of St. Pat's. It's the major. In fact, that's where I married my current wife, was at Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan. Amazing synagogue. Alan Dershowitz gave a talk one day as part of a remembrance program for the Holocaust, and we went. And Dershowitz quoted, of all people, Joseph Stalin. Because Joseph Stalin had said, the death of 1 million people is a statistic. The death of one person is a tragedy. And Dershowitz went on and said, when someone kills 1 or 2 people, the way the world is interconnected, the odds are quite good that if that person does the crime, that eventually they can run, they can't hide, they'll be caught. The odds are relatively much better now than they've ever been. But as the body count goes up, as the casualty figures increase, and we get into the area of mass murder, the greater the body count, the less likely it is that the guilty will be caught or punished. And he said, so when you think about mass murder, always multiply whatever that number is by the number 1. Always remember that each person who is slaughtered by such scum is part of an individual discrete murder that takes place again and again and again and again. So it's always times 1. It's always about the individual. It's always about the individual when we talk about anything, whether it's the loss of life or the creation of opportunities. It's always about that one person, you see. So imagine if enough agents were out there doing that sort of thing, like with that gas station, and liberating a job at a time. Wouldn't that make a difference? But you have a government on the federal level and governments on the state and local levels that are doing everything in their power to unemploy Americans, to drive American citizens into poverty, to make them dependent on government, to create frustration and anger that they can then channel into a direction that serves their purposes, not lift the lives up of those people who desperately want an opportunity. When you walk into a building where rats run through the hallways, when you flip on a light switch, there are so many bugs infesting the apartment that what you see is what we used to call the moving wall. Mm-hmm. You don't even know what the color of the paint on the wall is.
Oh, God.
When you walk into that building and the stench of poverty, as some of my partners used to refer to it, where there's no heat in the winter and no air conditioning in the summer, and kids wake up with bugs in their bed, my question isn't what would you be willing to do to get out of that situation, it's what wouldn't you do. And if there's no legitimate avenue, then these kids will do whatever it takes. And usually what does that mean? Getting involved in crime. And what does that lead to? Well, I grew up, and when I saw a guy in the blue suit and the car with the bubble gum machine on top, as I used to call it when I was a kid, the police car was my friend. When you grow up where you're making money on the side by shoplifting, by selling a little reefer on a street corner or doing some other stuff like that, when you see the cop, you see an adversary. So you go into those tough neighborhoods, the kids get raised up when they see the cops react to the nervousness of the kid, and we have tragedies. No rational human being, with or without a badge, wants to go out there and shoot another person. Every morning when I got dressed and put on my gun and put that badge in my pocket, I said a little prayer, please, God, don't let me need to use this damn thing today. I was thrilled that I went my full career without ever having to shoot another person. I came very close on a couple of occasions, and it wasn't a good feeling to feel that sweat running down your back, and I know you've been in those situations, Annie. Yeah. Rational people don't want to shoot other human beings. I love target shooting, but I couldn't even bring myself to shoot a dog that bit me, that jumped on me. I wound up smacking him with my .357, which is what I used to carry before we went to the semi-automatics, because I didn't want to shoot the dog. People don't want to shoot another person. But when you put people in life or death situations, when there's mistrust on both sides because you're dealing with a large population of children living in abject poverty and a sense of hopelessness, you wind up with the lunacy that we're seeing in inner cities today. As a cop, Annie, you tell me if I'm right or wrong.
No, you are right, because I remember the first time I came very close to shooting someone, I had what we called regular days off, RDO, the next day. I shook for 2 days until I finally got myself to say, I did the right thing, and I got criticized. Wow, why didn't you shoot him? Because the last second I saw the guy drop the knife. I had 2 other cops standing with me, and they were ready to pull the trigger until I yelled, stop. And I was able to arrest the guy, but I shook for 2 days afterwards. And I was able to put my uniform back on and still do my job. We don't want that to happen. But this is where we have the problem now, where we don't have the police walking the footpost. They're in the car. They're separate from the rest of the community. If you're out there and you're walking and you're talking to the store owners, as you're walking down the street, you're talking to the people. And that's where we need to bring policing back to the Andy Griffith type of thing, where you're interacting with the individuals out there. You'll find crime will drop. This is what New York City used to have, and this is what New York City has lost under de Blasio. He's taken away a great tool, which is a stop, question, and frisk. And every time I explain it to people that if that cop cannot tell you exactly why he stopped that individual, if he could not articulate why he stopped the person, why he questioned him, and why he went to that extra step to frisk him, that cop could be fired. That cop can be prosecuted. It was a great tool because the cop knew there had to be a definite reason you're doing it. You're not doing it to harass a person. You're doing it to protect the public and to protect yourself.
I was interviewed. I was interviewed for LifeZet, and I've written some articles for LifeZet, which is an online website. It's run by Laura Ingram, and they asked me about stop and frisk. And I said, look, I have been stopped by police when I was an agent. Even to this day, I haven't been stopped since I stopped being an agent, but I always carry in New York. I have a state carrying permit, and under federal law, we can carry nationally. because I'm retired law enforcement. But I've had occasion where a cop would see the bulge and say, "Who are you? Come here," pull you aside, and as soon as you say you're a federal agent, that's the end of the problem. But they're doing their job because they saw the bulge or they saw the gun or whatever happens. But they said to me, well, during the interview, he said, a lot of people are saying that obviously stop and frisk isn't fair because 80% of the time, or whatever the figure is, they're stopping people and they're not finding guns on them. And he said to me, how do you deflect that criticism? I said, it's only in this crazy era with crazy politicians are successes viewed as failures. He said, I don't think I understand what you're saying. I said, they stopped somebody and the guy didn't carry a gun, so my question to you is, what's the reason behind stop and frisk? And the reporter said, yeah, I'm not sure. He's, I guess, to find people with guns. I said, no, the best solution is to deter people from carrying guns illegally. So it's working when people aren't carrying guns, and instead of saying, boy, this is successful, they're saying, no, this is discriminatory because they're not carrying. Did it ever dawn on any of these geniuses that they're not carrying out of a fear that if they're stopped and frisked, they're going to be arrested? Tell me I'm wrong, Annie. Go ahead.
No, you're not wrong. A stop, question, and everyone says stop and frisk. No, it's stop, question, and then frisk. They leave out that part.
And by the way,
questioning.
What damage is done to the person who is stopped, questioned, and frisked?
Oh, they're about maybe 2 minutes late to their lunch date.
There you go. And if it's handled properly, it's an opportunity, again, to interact with the community and to say to the guy, understand, I'm stopping you because we're just tired of all the gun violence. You need to understand that I'm doing this to keep myself safe, but more importantly, to keep your community safe. And that's all you got to say to somebody. I used to get stopped all the time. When I was a kid, I had a Jag Roadster. The damn car thought it was an airplane. It was up in the air on the lift more often than it was on the ground. I just wish I had it now, because if you look at these auctions, these cars are going for astronomical prices. I had a canary yellow 68 Jag Roadster, and I was in my early 20s, and I got stopped routinely by the cops. I had one or two cops that was very aggressive, making, a snotty remark like, well, we know this is a stolen car. Yeah, right, thanks, officer, I appreciate that. That's just wrong, and it's dumb. And by the way, it wasn't about black or white. I'm white. It was about dopey cop. But I remember I had one cop who I was waiting at a red light, and he was on foot patrol. And he walked up to my car. I was waiting at a red light on Coney Island Avenue, and he said to me, son, when the light turns green, you see the bus stop on the left? I want you to make a left turn and pull into the bus stop, turn off your engine, and wait for me. Yes, sir. Light turned green. He stopped the traffic. I went into the spot. I turned off the engine. He walked up to me. He said, you know why I'm stopping you? I said, I'm not sure. Why don't you tell me? He said, well, it's a beautiful car. You're a young guy. I said, so you're wondering if I own it? He said, exactly. I said, not a problem. I showed him my license. I showed him my registration. And I said, I'm actually on the list to become a New York City police officer. He said, you're kidding. And we started talking, and I told him I had just lost my parents 2 years earlier. He said to me, it's time for my lunch break. Why don't I buy you lunch? I said, you got to be kidding. He said, nope. So we parked the car. We walked into a corner luncheonette, and we sat down for 40 minutes, and we just had a wonderful conversation. And that's community policing at its best.
Exactly.
Because I understood that he was concerned that I was driving a stolen car, and as soon as he realized that everything was in order, he couldn't have been nicer about it.
Exactly.
So
I've
had
the same thing.
You see a guy doing a job to protect you.
I had the same thing happen.
Michael.
Right on the corner, right in front of Wyckoff Hospital. I pulled a guy over, and I turned around and he says, are you aware why I stopped you? And he goes, no. Is it because I'm black? And I said, no. You've got a window broken on the driver's side here in the rear, and most people, when they go to steal a car, they will break one of these little windows like you've got in the back here, gain access, and steal the vehicle. Now, can I see your license and registration? Once I explained it to him, I said, if your car was stolen, wouldn't you want someone like me to find it for you and get it back to you?
To get it back for you.
And all of a sudden, he went from the fact that he said, I stopped him only because he was black. No, I stopped him because I was helping to protect his property. And once
Right.
you have the interaction of the police officer with the local community, that is where you can de-escalate a situation and handle it properly and make good relations. I mean, when I used to walk my foot post, I became like a walking billboard for the Marine Corps because I'd see these young guys out there hanging out. He says, "Do you want to get out of the neighborhood? Here's an idea. If you go and join the Marines, and I can tell you where the recruiter is, and you can go into boot camp. They will help pay for your college. You will get housing. You'll get clothing, and then you can go anywhere." I used to be a walking billboard for that.
And I'll give you another example, but I know Curtis wanted to ask me something, so why don't you ask me your question, Curtis, and I have a comment about that.
All right. Let's say you're back on the force full-time out there in the streets, and you pull over a guy, you tell him to put his hands up. He reaches into his car. Do you shoot him, or do you stop and think about the situation?
You're watching his hands very closely. One of the most dangerous things you can do in law enforcement is a car stop. And I've had people try to run me over.
Oh, yeah.
And so I developed a technique, and a lot of people do it now. I don't think we invented it, but no one was doing it at the time, and we started doing it. It was like being the Blue Angels. We'd fly in formation. If there was a car that we were interested in, because we were also looking at people that were driving these livery car service vehicles that were delivering prostitutes, drugs, and guns to locations. So we were stopping them. Many of them were illegal aliens. So we would box them in with 3 or 4 government vehicles, so we had nowhere to go. It certainly beat chasing them, and that's how we started to operate after I almost got run over. But the point is, when you're in a car, and Annie will verify this, that guy has the element of being, in his own environment. He can have weapons there. You also don't know what he may have just done. How many cops get shot because the cop in uniform walking down the block encounters a guy who just robbed a bank or just raped a girl? The cop has no idea who this guy is, but the guy knows what he just did, sees the cop, and thinks, uh-oh, he's on to me. Am I, again, right or wrong, Annie?
Well, Mike, for us, because, you worked for INS, so you guys worked in packs. When you have an officer like me that's alone on foot, or I may be working with another partner, when you approach the vehicle, you do not go beyond the back passenger door. Matter of fact, you're behind it, and you're watching using the driver's mirrors. And if it's 2 of us, you stay back there until you see everyone has their hands either on the dashboard, the steering wheel, or the seat in front of them. When you have all the hands showing, then and only then do you approach the vehicle to the driver's side, and you have your partner on the opposite side. If you're there alone,
by the way,
you're there alone,
we sometimes also worked as a pair. We sometimes also worked as pairs, so we did the same exact stuff.
Yeah, and if you're doing it as on a lone. But, Curtis, when you do it on loan on a foot post, you radio in, you tell them what the license is, who you stopped, where you stopped, and only then do you start to approach the car. Again, staying behind the last seat that has a passenger in it. So if both front and back is occupied, you're standing by the trunk, and only when you see all hands do you approach. And you never stand full body in front of the driver. You always stand a little bit behind the driver.
The guy who tried to run me over, we actually set up a checkpoint with NYPD, and the guy blew the checkpoint and swerved at me.
Yeah.
Picture that.
I guess my point is this: in this climate today, where police are being just shot left and right and killed by these knuckleheads out here that don't cooperate, I guess my point I was getting at: are police more hesitant to defend themselves because they're afraid they may be
there was a story, it's a good question,
or punished or whatever, fired or whatever?
So, excellent question. Look, Fox News carried the story about this police woman who was beat badly by a guy who actually pounded her head into the ground because she was afraid to pull a gun. And then we had a shooting of a mentally ill woman by a police officer, and before the facts were known, Dumb Blasio, the idiot mayor of New York, immediately attacks the cop. This is a tragedy. It's senseless. He should have done this. He should have done that. Hey, Mayor, I'd like you to go on patrol one day and see how you react to someone charging at you with a knife. I want to know what you're going to do. He had a taser. He used his gun. You know, I have to tell you, that kind of statement by anybody is nuts. And we had the same problem with Bloomberg with the police shooting. The first thing Bloomberg said was, we're going to make that cop accountable. Hey, how about we've just had a shooting. It's a tragedy when anybody's life is lost. We're going to do a thorough, transparent investigation, and I will have no comment until the results of the investigation are handed to me.
Yeah.
How about doing that? When an airplane crashes, they bring in the FAA. The guy doesn't say, well, it could have been this, it could have been that. No, what do they always say? There's going to be an exhaustive investigation to find out why that airplane fell out of the sky. We're not going to comment on the investigation until we know all the facts. How about a political leader saying, we're not going to discuss this until we know all the facts? I just want to assure the public, we will make certain that every stone is unturned, every fact that can be gathered will be gathered. We will assemble it all together. We will keep you posted, but we're not going to comment on this until we know exactly what happened and why it happened.
You know,
when you come out within an hour of a shooting and say, what was wrong with that cop and what was he thinking, and this is terrible. And by the way, just from a fiduciary perspective, he's opening up the city to a massive lawsuit.
Yes.
And imagine the poor cop and imagine all the other cops. And, you know, George W. Bush did this to those two Border Patrol agents, Ramos and Compion. If you remember the case, they were in a high-traffic area. High traffic not meaning vehicles, but drug trafficking. It was a traditional area where the smugglers were. They stopped the guy, and the guy started fighting with them, and then he ran, got a distance from them, and spun around, and they were convinced they saw a weapon, and they fired. They thought they missed him because he ran across the border into Mexico. And I don't know why it was that way with the Border Patrol. In my job, we were responsible. But as long as they notified their boss, well, the boss heard the gunfire, everybody came running, and they told the boss, yeah, the guy seemed to have a weapon. I can't find it, but he ran back to Mexico. If he had a gun, maybe he took it with him. These guys wound up getting criminally prosecuted and went to jail, even though the vehicle that the guy abandoned was loaded up with hundreds of thousands of dollars of marijuana. And then they kept from the defense attorneys the knowledge that this guy had been previously arrested for drug trafficking and subsequent to the event was stopped again with drugs.
Yeah.
And these guys went to jail. What do you think the effect is on the Border Patrol? Because I can tell you, because I speak to Border Patrol agents, it had a chilling effect. Because now you have to make a decision. Do I go out there and risk my life and risk my career and risk my freedom, or do I spend more time at Dunkin' Donuts?
It puts every single law enforcement member at a point where there's like, well, do I really do my job? Do I do what what I'm trained to do, or do I step back and say, "Oh, wait a minute, let's wait to see how things turn out, and maybe this, maybe that, maybe they'll just go away, so I don't have to do anything at all." It is really
rational
horrific.
people don't act against their own best interests, Annie. Rational people do not take action that's against their own best interests.
No, and now what we have Los Angeles, I don't know if you've caught this, Mike, that in Los Angeles they were turning around and saying, well, you know, you have to work to diffuse the situation. So if this guy is coming at you with a baseball bat, you got to step back, put a little distance between yourself. Hello? The guy's coming
at you. Remember George? By the way, do you remember George Bush giving National Guardsmen an award for backing up when armed drug dealers came across the Mexican border?
Yeah, it's crazy.
This had to have been a first. Yes.
It
He
is.
gave them a unit citation for withdrawing rapidly in the face because they weren't supposed to be armed, and they quickly withdrew and got out of the way of the path of these vehicles, and they were given awards.
Giving an award for not doing your job. That is a first.
For running away.
We're supposed to be the ones
Now,
running.
meanwhile, let's turn. I got to turn to Hillary because I'm looking at the clock and I know time is limited. I got to tell you, I love being on the show with you, Annie. It's always a privilege to join you.
Oh, it's always fun.
But you know, you have to look at Hillary Clinton. And by the way, I'm not being partisan. I'm registered as a Democrat. I've always voted as an independent because I think both political party leaders traditionally could be in jail for RICO violations, racketeering. But think about Hillary and the email. When I went before those generals and colonels earlier this week, I said to them, if you folks treated security material the way Hillary did, where would you be? And one guy said, well, we wouldn't be in this room, Mr. Cutler. You'd be talking to yourself because we'd all be in jail. So I want to remind everybody what Comey had said. And then I want you to know, I wrote an article. I don't know if you saw it, Annie, for Front Page Magazine, The Hillary Virus, Corrupting Our Government One Agency at a Time.
I have
That's my latest article for Front Page.
I have it right in front of me, and it's the top one.
Okay. Good, thank you. So here's what I just want to say real quick. So you've got the head of the FBI, James Comey, saying this. I just took out 3 little paragraphs from his speech of July the 5th. And I have friends who are former FBI agents, and they're spitting blood over what he did, or perhaps more properly, didn't do. In looking back at our investigation into mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentional and willful mishandling of classified information. Really? Well, she did. Or vast quantities of materials exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct. Yeah, she had a server in her house. It wasn't installed by accident. Or indications of disloyalty to the United States or efforts to obstruct justice. Yes, she did obstruct. If you're told by Congress or by a court that we want your documents and you destroy them, that's called obstruction of justice. And then he says, we do not see these things here. But then he says this, and this is the mind blower. To be clear, this is not to suggest that in similar circumstances, a person who engaged in this activity would face no consequences. To the contrary, those individuals are often subject to security or administrative sanctions, but that is not what we are deciding now. As a result, although the Department of Justice makes final decisions on matters like this, we are expressing to justice our view that no charges are appropriate in this case. Well, wait a moment. That is not to suggest that under similar circumstances, others who engage in this activity would not be punished. And when you talk about sanctions, even if you don't criminally indict, you could certainly strip somebody permanently of their ability to see anything of a classified nature. Why then was she treated differently? You know, I'm Jewish, and the question we ask on Passover is, why is this night different from all other nights? So why is this government employee different from all other government employees?
Her name is Clinton.
You know what, Mike? But no one pays attention to the fact that James Comey was the investigator and prosecutor in Whitewater. Nothing happened to the Clintons under Whitewater. He was also the investigator and prosecutor going after the Mark Rich pardon that Bubba did.
Yep.
No one went after the Clintons. That's twice he failed to take action.
He was a major player at HSBC, which was a bank that was heavily involved in money laundering.
So if he never took action in any of those other situations, what makes you think he would do his job with Hillary Clinton?
Well, all I'm saying is, so you understand this, but then the average American who is a schmo, they were interviewing these 2 very attractive women, you know, very well put together, very articulate, and they said, what do you think of the email? Oh, it's email. And what they don't understand, these weren't muffin recipes. People are dead because of this. Besides Benghazi, you look at that Iranian scientist who went missing. And, you know, you look at all the other things that have happened, and I'm sure other people have gone missing that we're not talking about because it would divulge other activities that we're involved in. When you divulge secrets, and then what I wrote in my article, by the way, the one about Hillary the virus, and the reason I called it that, you know, I had a brain spasm. And I was thinking, you know, if you look at the definition of a virus, number one, these are dictionary definitions. Number one, an infective agent that typically consists of a nucleic acid molecule in a protein coat that is too small to be seen by light microscopy and is able to multiply only within the living cell of the host. And I said, oh, the host, okay. So in other words, it lives and is a parasite within the host. And then it says a harmful or corrupting influence the virus of cruelty that is latent in all human beings. And finally, a computer virus, a piece of code that is capable of copying itself and typically has a detrimental effect, such as corrupting the system or destroying data. And when I saw that definition, I said, this is just too perfect, right? Corrupting the system or destroying the data. And that was why I gave it the title that I gave it. But, you know, you look at everything else that goes on. She has been living off of the host, the United States, with the exorbitant fees that she's been given, pay for play. And so then I also posted a link in the article, and I hope everybody goes to read it, over at Front Page Magazine. And this was the press release title from the Clinton website. Clinton Foundation and Gates Foundation partnered to measure global progress for women and girls. And this, again, is Gates. And then when they talk about the elements of the crime, I have the elements posted in my article. I'm going to save time by not reading it. But what I want you to know is this, and this is the significance to classified material for people who normally never dealt with it. I had a top secret clearance, and my safe was only certified in my office to handle secret materials. When I was up at the FBI or DEA, they had sufficient facilities to handle top secret material, so we would see it up there. But it didn't go anywhere with us. And in fact, when you're at the FBI Academy, and I was there for training when I became a senior special agent, they call it the gerbil tubes, because it's like a little rat cage where you go through sealed tubes from building to building. So if you're carrying classified material, it's okay to do it because you're not outside where the wind can blow it away or something can happen, because the tubes are, you know, airtight, watertight, whatever, and you're able to move between buildings with classified material. This isn't a joke. If I left my safe open at night and it was only certified to secret, and my safe was in a locked office, and my office was in a federal building with 24/7 armed guards, but if my boss came to work the next day and noticed that my safe had not been locked, at a minimum I would be looking at a suspension. This has nothing to do with what she did in terms of the severity of the problem. But here's the distinction. Top secret, and this was signed by Obama as an executive order on December 29, 2009. Top secret shall be applied to information the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security that the original classification authority is able to identify or describe. So top secret information, its release, could cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. Secret shall be applied to information the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause serious damage to the national security. This is very serious. This isn't a game. This isn't a weather report. This is the names of informants, the names of undercover agents, the time scales, perhaps, of military operations. And by the way, isn't it remarkable that Obama told people, we're going to leave Iraq on such and such date? General Paul Vallely has become a good friend. I'm very proud to consider him a friend. He's a great American. He was a two-star general who ran special forces in Operation Desert Storm. Brilliant guy. And I've been to his home. He arranged for me to do a speaking event out in Montana, which is where he lives now. And by the way, if anybody out there knows of opportunities for speaking events, please let me know. This weekend I'm going to be in New Jersey. I'm doing another visit to Jersey. Then I'm going to Pennsylvania in December. I'll be in Texas in February. I've been going all over the country trying to get people to understand the issue. But, you know, understand the severity of what we're dealing with. This is about undermining the safety of our entire country, and yet nobody seems to get this. But you did have Obama releasing information about exit dates. And I said to Paul Vallely, General Vallely, over dinner one night, I said, tell me something, Paul, because maybe I've lost my mind. In my thinking, the day that you're going to invade and the day that you're planning to leave are dates that you never want divulged to anybody, because it gives your enemies opportunities to devise strategies to counter what you're doing. I said, am I getting this wrong? He said, no, normally that's exactly right. Those are two dates that you guard with everything you have, the day you're going in and what your plans are for leaving. He said how in the world they could tell people, the world in advance, that we're going to leave on such and such date, or we're sending our troops and giving specific information, endangers every serviceman and woman's life who are involved with those operations and undermines what we're doing.
This
administration... I just looked at one...
No, I was going to say...
This has been an administration that I can't understand about anything. There's nothing they have done where I could come up with a reasonable excuse or explanation. What do you think of that statement?
I completely agree, because look what they did with the Osama bin Laden raid. Shortly after the raid, you've got the vice president divulging SEAL Team 6 to our enemies. And shortly after that, because of that divulgence, down goes Extortion 17 with 21 Americans killed. I mean, this administration has cost so many American lives, and no one is holding them accountable. We can say Benghazi as much as we want, but how many other men and women besides them, like the 21 in Extortion 17, have lost their lives because of the loose lips of this administration?
Look, you're looking at that. You're looking at the terror attacks carried out by people that were admitted into the United States. You have a president who recklessly continues to admit more refugees. Hillary Clinton, who promises, or maybe more properly threatens, a 500% increase. And immigration is such a pivotal issue. I got to read this to you because this is so important. It'll just take me a second to bring it up on my screen here. Immigration is the pivotal issue where 9/11 is concerned. I've arrested terrorists as an agent, which is why I was invited to provide testimony to the commission. Here is the preface of the 9/11 Commission staff report on terrorist travel. It is perhaps obvious to state that terrorists cannot plan and carry out attacks in the United States if they are unable to enter the country. Yet prior to September 11, while there were efforts to enhance border security, no agency of the U.S. government thought of border security as a tool in the counterterrorism arsenal. Indeed, even after 19 hijackers demonstrated the relative ease of obtaining a U.S. visa and gaining admission into the United States, border security still is not considered a cornerstone of national security policy. We believe, for reasons that we discuss in the following pages, that it must be made one. So they're talking about visas. Meanwhile, the visa waiver program expands. It expanded under Bush. It's expanding under Obama. They talk about border security and national security being one and the same. Our border doesn't exist. The presence of record quantities of heroin across the country is irrefutable evidence of that. The idea of giving lawful status to illegal aliens whose identities can't be verified is insane. So we'll read two quick statements here. And this is page 47 of the 9/11 Commission staff report on terrorist travel. This is an official report published by the government printing office. This isn't the Daily Inquirer, okay? Once terrorists had entered the United States, their next challenge was to find a way to remain here. Their primary method was immigration fraud. For example, Yusuf and Ajaj concocted bogus political asylum stories when they arrived in the United States. Mahmoud Abu Alima, involved in both the World Trade Center and landmark plots, received temporary residence under the Seasonal Agriculture Worker Program after falsely claiming that he picked beans in Florida. And then we go to page 98, and this is really the home run. You have got to be brain dead not to get it. Terrorists in the 1990s, as well as the September 11th hijackers, needed to find a way to stay in or embed themselves in the United States if their operational plans were to come to fruition. As already discussed, this could be accomplished legally by marrying an American citizen, achieving temporary worker status, or applying for asylum after entering. In many cases, the act of filing for an immigration benefit sufficed to permit the alien to remain in the country until the petition was adjudicated. Terrorists were free to conduct surveillance, coordinate operations, obtain and receive funding, go to school and learn English, make contacts in the United States, acquire necessary materials, and execute an attack. We just saw a case where over 800 aliens from countries that sponsor terrorism who were under orders of deportation were unbelievably granted citizenship. Mm-hmm. Hillary Clinton wants to take that same bureaucratic mechanism and provide perhaps 20 or 30 million illegal aliens with lawful status. There will be no way to conduct any interviews. There will be no way to conduct any field investigations. And for all her talk about how she wants to help children in America, and folks, pay attention, and please share this information with everybody you know, okay? If Hillary gets her way and legalizes millions of illegal aliens, the day they get their magic cards, they will have the absolute, irrefutable, undeniable right to petition to have each and every single one of their minor children legally brought to America and enrolled in schools around the United States. Third world country families typically have 5 and 6 children per family, and sometimes many more. Think about that. If we suddenly had an influx of 10 or 20 or 25 or 30 million non-English speaking children flooding American schools across the country that can't keep their head above water now, what will happen then? We're told that school grades are in the tank. Not so much many American kids. Lots of those numbers are being pulled down by kids who come here from third world countries who can't speak English. About 7 years ago, the Congressional Budget Office did a study, and they found that children who cannot speak English cost the school districts 20 to 40% more per child to educate. Our schools are having a problem today. They've cut funding for the early intervention programs for children with learning disabilities such as autism. There is no sustainable way for America to deal with that massive influx of foreign kids, and there'll be no way to screen them. In April of this year, the House Immigration Subcommittee, and I've been before that committee at least 7 or 8 times myself as an expert witness, brought in a sheriff from Maryland to talk about the fact that Obama had released from custody hundreds of thousands of criminal aliens who went on to commit more than 140 known homicides and thousands of assaults, including sexual assault. In fact, I was very gratified. Steve King quoted me at that hearing because he had remembered when years earlier, when I testified, he asked me if I knew how many people were killed every year to illegal aliens, and I said to him at the hearing, Congressman, I don't know the number, but I can assure you my instincts tell me that it's a multiple of those people killed on 9/11, the number of people. His study showed, and it was done by the GAO, and he didn't mention the number at the hearing, but I know he said it elsewhere, at least 7,000 people per year are dying because of people who shouldn't be in the country. But the sheriff who testified at that hearing was amazing. He said that since 2013 in Maryland, over 60%, I think it was 63% if I remember correctly, I don't want to misspeak, of the calls that he had gotten to send sheriffs to the schools because of acts of violence and assault involved kids who had come across the border as part of the surge from Central America into the United States since 2013. Oh. We're bringing gang members into our schools.
Yes, we are.
And so understand what this would do for all the talk about how she's going to help the kids and help our schools. How would an influx of millions or perhaps tens of millions of foreign students help American kids, especially kids at risk in tough neighborhoods?
It won't. We're down to our last 7 minutes. Gosh, the whole show has gone so fast. I knew I pulled out all...
Doesn't it though, Annie?
Yeah, I had all these articles and notes I did so carefully I said, I know, we're going to put Mike in this direction, that direction, and I haven't gotten through half.
I apologize.
Why? It's always fun talking to you. And one of these days,
the interview has a life of its own, doesn't it?
Yes. But next time you come down to South Carolina, you got to give me a call, and we'll have lunch or something together. Because I love.
Why don't you arrange an event for me, and I'll come down?
Well, I have to see what we can do, and maybe have you talk to our county GOP, because I've had Curtis down here to talk and address our local GOP, and see what some good Southern old folk look like.
Where are you from, Curtis? Where's Curtis from?
Curtis? I think he fell asleep. Originally from the Philadelphia area, he's down in Florida. But Curtis, unmute yourself. There you go, Curtis. But Mike, I want to thank you for...
I'm down in Florida.
I want to thank you, Mike, for joining us. I'm telling everyone to go to your website, which is MikeCutler.net. And
Michael Cutler.
And you've got
MichaelCutler.net.
Yep.
Michael Cutler.
That's right, MichaelCutler.net.
Not Mike Cutler, Michael Cutler. Yep.
And then you have your radio show, which is on Fridays at 7 o'clock here on Blog Talk Radio. They can find you over there. Also, I'm telling you, they've got to become followers of your show and all this information you got out there. But I'll have you, you're always a favorite here, Mike. Always a favorite. But
well, it's my privilege to be on your program. You know, we've become good friends over the years. We've worked together in our law enforcement capacities, and we've certainly remained good friends ever since. And anytime you want me on, you know, I'll come on. Why don't we do it maybe before the election if you have time for me? Because I want everybody to understand what we're up against. I have my issues with Donald Trump, okay? The guy is, he's different, I have to tell you. But when I look at Hillary Clinton, and I look at what she promises, or more properly threatens to do, when you look at her agenda, when you look at the lies, when you look at the nonsense, you know, it's hard to get people to figure out where they stand. But when you realize that what she promises is contradicted by what she promises, you know, you can't be in two places at one time. You can't flood a labor pool that is already overflowing with many more foreign workers and then talk about how you're going to provide more opportunities and higher wages. Labor is a commodity. If you flood the marketplace with a commodity, you drive down the price. And what's so remarkable, Hillary made the point about China flooding America with aluminum and steel, and they are. And the impact this has is to drop down the price of aluminum and steel. In economics, it is called dumping, and she used the term dumping. Dumping is illegal, and it's a crime. But commodities don't only involve gold or aluminum or steel. Labor is a commodity. George Borjas, a Harvard-educated economist, nationally world-recognized economist, I know George Borjas, has made a case for the fact that labor indeed is a commodity. Well, if you flood the marketplace with a commodity, you drive down its value. And he has done detailed studies about how far we've driven down the value of labor. He looked, I believe it was George, who looked at the meatpacking industry. The meatpacking industry 20 years ago was paying $18 an hour. It's difficult, dangerous, filthy, back-breaking work. Today, the average wage is $8 an hour. How did that happen? By flooding the meatpacking industry with illegal aliens and then ultimately with lawful workers, but the bottom line was the damage was done. So even if it wasn't for inflation, and in 20 years there's been massive inflation, the wages for people in that industry have been cut by more than 50%, simply by flooding the workplace. And that's what they're doing with industries across the board now, and it's now the high-tech industries. There is no career path safe for American workers where we won't, in essence, turn America into a third-world country by reducing expectations of workers to those of those folks who live in the third world. And that seems to be the goal, to create an oligarchy in America where you'll either be extravagantly wealthy or incredibly poor. And that's the direction we're headed right now if we don't alter our trajectory.
Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us, and we'll be talking later on. I just want to remind everyone, we'll be back here on Tuesday. We've got Reverend Derek McCoy joining us, and also running for Congress, Elbert Guillory is going to be returning with us. So check out Mike's website, MikeCutler.net. It has been
MichaelCutler.net.
I keep on saying it. I always say it wrong. MichaelCutler.net. We'll get people
there
over to you. There we go. But Mike,
okay, thank you, Annie. Thanks for having me, Curtis. Good to meet you. Have a great weekend.
You too.
All right, you too.
All right, Curtis, we're down to our last 2 minutes. Man, the show has gone so fast, so much fun. It's always fun to have my buddy Mike on. But as I said, we'll be back next week, same time, same station on Tuesday. And I guess that's it for now. We are working on hopefully having a special guest next week. I will say that he's got some new videos out, and there are a lot of interesting things on it, and it's making the rounds finally through the internet. I won't say who the person is until I have it confirmed. I'm waiting for his gal to get back to me. But, Curtis, that's it. That's the show for today.
All right.
90 seconds.
All right, I say good night, God bless, and be safe out there.
If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. Health care plan. Health care plan.
60 seconds.
Let me tell you how it's gonna work, kid. You work hard like your parents both did. Everything you earn by breaking your back, we're gonna redistribute when we make our pay tax. Hey, take it down, don't be a jerk, 'cause none deserve it better than the ones who won't work. We're gonna blow away what I hope for this road. Use your hard money just to buy a new boat. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of left hypocrisy. Little peak house is for you and me. Oh, welcome to the face. Welcome to the face of the new
10 seconds.
Here in this land of the not so free. Party not restrictions, drugs for our own cause. We got a pen in California, Bob, that's all you lost. Political correctness will replace the Bill of Rights. Support religious freedom, let you praise Jesus Christ. The breath is in our pockets, but there's no longer free. You cannot make a move now that the NSA don't expect equality, respect, and fair play. The IRS will target those who vote the wrong way. Welcome to the place. Welcome to the place of the left hypocrisy. Little peak outfit for you and me. Oh, welcome to the place. Welcome to the face of the new democracy. Here in the land of the not so free. Oh, 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 oh.
This is the most transparent administration in history. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
If you've got a business, you didn't build that.